Hi everyone, Rose here, Group 12, and I will be reviewing Module 4, Managers, Workers, and Bosses. From 1880 to 1930, an increase from 7,000 to 226,000 American engineers worked in corporation. In 1965, there were only 5% of engineers that were self-employed. Corporation had the ability to raise money that are necessary for large technological products and have stronger incentives. They tend to attract top engineers. Corporation aimed at selling to those who have the ability to pay and concentrated on the promotion of wealth. They care about the needs of consumers and less on the laborers. Engineers tend to move into management due to better pay, loyalty, autonomy, and improved engineering outcome. Some engineers in corporations face working on a tight budget to meet consumer expectations. An example is George A. Campbell. He was an AT&T engineer who was assigned to work on distortion and sound transmission in 1899. The patent on this assignment was not filed until March 1900. Campbell had to wait to file his patent and wait to announce his discoveries to protect AT&T advantages. Michael Pupin was a professor at Columbia University who already had patents in telephony. With the loading coil, he filed his patent in December 1899. Frederick Winslow Taylor, Scientific Management. The purpose was to increase efficiency by employing competent men to manage workmen. Ford's assembly line was repetitive work. Laborers were scheduled bathroom breaks, and new processes and techniques were to replace skilled workers. Herbert Hoover, the 31st President of the United States of America, also known as the Great Engineer, he started his career as a professional mining engineer and made a fortune working in Australia and Asia. Became a successful consulting engineer. In 1917, he was the head of the U.S. Food Administration, and in the 1920s, he had a role in Secretary of Commerce. During his presidency, the stock market crashed in 1929. He worked with businesses to cap prices, divide markets, and shore up the economy, but was unsuccessful. He was pushed to have an attitude of letting things take its course to allow business to correct itself.
So let's begin with the 1960s. A large number of engineers and engineering firms depended on military contracts to survive. At that time, the Soviets and the Americans entered what can be described as the arms race. By the year 1965, the United States has over 30,000 nuclear bombs, and the Soviets have 35,000. The arms race develops between the European nations as part of the rising nationalistic ideas. Early on, many inventors would receive military funding to create war-capable items such as the telegraph, airplane, and gyroscope. In fact, Thomas Edison would help create the NCS in 1915 to help coordinate the inventive practices. After the First World War, America rolled back on its military involvement, but will continue to support after the Second World War. Now, when the Second World War occurred, that resulted in the creation of the Office of Scientific Research and Development, headed by Mr. Bush as part of the Manhattan Project. And the earliest example would be MIT's Rad Lab. Then we move on to the space race. This all began when the United States and the Soviet Union created their own strategies to achieve the first man into orbit and eventually the first man and landing on the moon. Basically, space is a extremely strategic military advantage for any country. As a result, this helped create NASA and garner aerospace support for the United States. However, the Soviets did beat the Americans into orbit by putting the first man into orbit, Mr. Yuri, in 1961. However, that being said, the United States had set a goal by 1971 to put a man on the moon. Continuing on, so many projects during that time, during the Cold War, were so large and complicated that a simple organization did not have the manpower, the resources, or the knowledge to complete the task at hand, so they turned to universities to research. One of those projects ended up being the SAGE project. Now, we talk about Jay Forrester because he chose IBM for a military contractor, but allowed MIT to oversee the manufacturing and supervise IBM. Looking back at the Cold War and engineering during the Cold War, we can see there were many ethical challenges faced during that time. Since they created a new engineering system that utilized military funding. Many people, including President Eisenhower, became concerned that this could actually encourage war for profit. As funding would increase for military research, that governmental money had to be derived from some other place, such as healthcare or social services. The military funding did lead to the creation of better air travel, as well as so many different products such as Teflon, cargo pants. Now, as a benefit, some of the money would also go to other university programs. So now let's move on to Module 6, which is the politics of algorithms.
Before computers became machines, the first computer was a person that performed calculations, and most of the time it was women who filled these positions. Dorothy Vaughan helped with transitioning human computers into IBM computers for NASA. Mary Jackson was the first African American female engineer, and Katherine Johnson made crucial calculations that helped guide America's first manned mission into suborbit.
So, what really is an algorithm? Well, algorithms are customarily for profit and they favor the consumer over the citizen. Their focus is commonly on efficiency and maximizing output and revenue. Their efficacy needs to be examined regularly with mindful attention on how an algorithm can affect all people involved. Without that function, we could have a biased outcome, especially for specific demographics. One of the concerns seen with algorithms is they are done without reflecting the needs or concerns of the public in which they affect. Some examples of those biases would be facial recognition.
Algorithm is a system or process that leads to an outcome. Professor Christopher Jones' Politics of Algorithms lecture mentioned Melvin Kranzberg's law, where technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. It can lead to potential biases where one view is more favorable compared to another.
Planning and designing a product with an artificially limited life cycle. This e-waste contains resources such as cadmium, cobalt, lithium, and because of that, what will happen when all this e-waste is taken to get recycled? People will go through it, all that toxins from it being melted down and refined will go back into the atmosphere, and people will breathe it in. So you may be shocked at how much energy it requires to do particular things in technology and engineering. For illustration, data centers account for about 2% of all global electricity consumed per year. Additionally, the heat produced from manufacturing and recycling needs a way to be cooled down so that it does not damage the hardware. Because of that, server farms can actually consume about 360,000 gallons of water per day. We are in the growing midst of an urgent transition from fossil fuel to renewable energy sources, which is absolutely necessary to avert any more climate change. Yet, a lot of the infrastructure needed requires minerals that have to be mined. Those minerals are lithium, cobalt, and nickel, which are critical to the production of lithium-ion batteries, which are used in any type of electrical vehicle. Skyrocketing demand for these minerals is going to drive the mining industry, which is already destructive enough to the ecosystem and communities around it. In certain geographic hotspots, more than we ever thought, because mining for materials are often done in really destructive and dangerous manners